Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on securing the remote workforce's new normal, the fight back with cyber AI. I'm Matt Royal, Marketing Director over at ProBrand. Before we get started, just a couple of house rules and reminders. Please do use the polling function to ask any questions. We'll have in the order of 3 to 5 minutes at the end of this session for a Q&A. And don't forget, if not already, please view in theatre mode the button that is just below your viewing pane. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Mariana Pereira, who is the Director of Email Security over at Darktrace. Over to you, Mariana.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you to everyone who's joining us this morning. I'm really excited to be presenting this talk on securing the new normal, especially because I feel like every time I give this presentation, normal has changed once again. And so what I'd like to do is share with you all a couple of thoughts as we are constantly thinking about how to use artificial intelligence, cyber AI, and how it can help our overstretched security teams to fight back against an ever-changing, ever-evolving backdrop of threat landscape, or whatever on earth normal becomes in the next day. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and then we're going to look at what will that attack landscape look like in the future. So we'll do a little bit of crystal ball gazing. So let's start. Well, obviously, I think every one of you has their own different rankings of how the threat landscape has changed and what is the most challenging aspect of now dealing with that threat landscape, or to deal with the new reality that, especially when we're dealing with flexible working or remote workers, suddenly have come into play. One of the things that we're very proud of is having seen our AI do very well in the transition of this work environment, because it is adaptive and it was able to keep up. And so when we changed what seemed overnight all of our working playbooks, the AI was actually able to keep up with that change and picked up within that 24-hour that suddenly, even though we have workers working in slightly different configurations, the pattern of work that we do actually isn't fundamentally all that different. We're collaborating with more or less the same people. We're doing more or less the same tasks, albeit in a slightly different way. And so this shift has, as you know, introduced many vulnerabilities. Not only is suddenly the protection that we used to be able to think of, the corporate Wi-Fi environment, for instance, that has largely gone, as those work devices are now connecting from kitchens or shared Wi-Fis and shared households. That has also meant that we are collaborating through cloud platforms or collaboration tools a hell of a lot more. That has brought some inadvertent data exposure, as possibly with that practical attitude of let's get it done and let's think of ways to get around the limitations, potentially sharing very privileged information about upcoming product releases or pricing or other intellectual property has suddenly exposed data by being in those maybe public shared environments. And that really comes to also another point, that when we historically thought of insider threat or potentially that malicious insider, now actually insider threat is a lot less evil, so to speak, and there's a lot more of accidental creation of vulnerabilities and a lot more human error that we as a cybersecurity company or as a cybersecurity team need to think about to help them sort of safeguard around the perfectly normal expectation, which is that they are human beings. From a security point of view, I found it curious that we seem to have adopted back that same mentality of thinking, okay, well, let's secure the endpoint, let's secure the devices. And there's a lot of talk about antivirus, anti-malware, or endpoint detection and response capabilities. But what I would submit is that apart from the EDR, we should really be thinking of XDR, of XDAR, right? The detection but autonomous response piece, because so much is about getting to that threat fast before it can escalate into a crisis. So what we're dealing with an aggressive threat environment. We've got fast moving attacks like ransomware. Ransomware also has had a big year in 2020. We've seen it evolve. One of the threats that we talk about in the year in review presentations is about Sodinokibi, how ransomware also can now be thought of not just as a malware, but also almost like an APT, right? An advanced persistent threat. There's somebody exfiltrating data before it encrypts the data, and now you've also got a double threat to deal with. We're dealing with data breaches in the cloud. We're talking about accidental insider threats, all sorts of terrible things that keeps us up at night and adds to our stress level. But let's see how we can use AI to mitigate and fight back some of these things. Now, I promised you a real life example, and I want to share with you two stories. The first is an attack that was found in a cloud environment. Historically, we have seen cloud be discussed sometimes separately than the rest of the infrastructure or the rest of the digital ecosystem as this thing that we need to add onto our digital estate. More and more, especially when I think about email security and in my job with working with analysts and with security teams all around the world, I see that it's increasingly difficult to talk about cloud security or to talk about email security as two distinct things. And this example here of this compromised Microsoft 365 account shows exactly why this is a constant battle of trying to close those gaps between the security silos. Essentially, this is a story that has been played out in many organizations, and some of you might have even seen this happen within your own organizations. You receive an email from a trusted contact. Maybe it's a trusted supplier or a business partner. That has a link in the email, and because it's coming from a trusted sender, you don't think twice before clicking on the link. So you click on the link, but unknown to you, that account had actually been compromised, and the link is not what it looks like. What does this look like in practice? Well, we detected in one of our prospects and now customer environments exactly this first part of the story. A series of emails had been received by this company from what seemed like a trusted partner. Sorry, that was Siri. So the trusted partner's account had been compromised. Their infrastructure had been used to send a whole bunch of emails that all followed the same template, which is, RFP for company name. All of these different emails were actually quite unique, and they contained some different bits in them that showed that they were actually kind of tailored, possibly automatically tailored for the recipient. But the AI understood these as being various degrees of threats. And the scores that we're seeing on the left-hand side is that interpretation of how unusual is this email, given what we know about the interaction between these people, given the link, given the context of this business. Now, the link actually connected, well, hovering over, we would have seen that it didn't actually go to a SharePoint environment, but clicking on the link, a page would open up saying, you've expired, your credentials have expired, please put in your username and password. Of course, this wasn't actually the legitimate page, and in signing in through this fake page, the user was actually handing over their credentials, so the attackers now basically have multiplied and harvested even more credentials from more people. This is exactly actually what happened when I think it was Andrew that clicked on this link and went and put in his credentials. No, sorry, it wasn't Andrew, it was actually Paul Peterson. So the user, Paul Peterson, had connected onto the site and logged in and handed over the credentials to the attackers. And we are seeing then here how this interplays away from an email attack and into a cloud attack. So now somebody that has Paul's credential is logging on. And we see here on the right-hand side, this SaaS anonymous share link created. The attackers went in and started looking at everything else that was available in this in the company's SharePoint environment, unbeknown to Paul. And then they used all of the all of that intel that they gathered doing reconnaissance to use Paul's account to send out a whole bunch of other emails. So we see down here that height, that peak in email sending that suddenly Paul, rather unusual for his activity, suddenly sent out an outbound of 1,685 emails to other people, possibly other contacts in his address book. Everyone who will have received that email from Paul will in turn have, back to the beginning of the story, have received an email from a trusted partner or a supplier and will accidentally click on the link with the anonymous link that has been created. This basically grows that attack return on investor, the attackers' return on investment exponentially as each one of them, these accounts, leads to more and more compromised accounts. What does this look like on the flip side? Well, if Paul had realized that his account had been compromised, he would have then had to send out some kind of alert or message to say, hey folks, my account's been compromised. And that's exactly what we saw playing out on Twitter a few months ago. Back in September, this lady, Eleanor, who had her account compromised, realized that it was sending out a whole bunch of emails with fake invoices. And she took to Twitter and tried reaching out to all of her contacts to say, my account's been compromised, please don't click on that link, this is malicious. And what we saw was Darktrace in action. And this was, one of those brilliant moments of validation where the folks over at SOCFIN, who have a relationship with Eleanor already established, who know her as a trusted contact, well, while the users might have been fooled, the AI wasn't. The AI intercepted the email, understood it to be slightly anomalous, and blocked it from being delivered. And this really brings us to the question that so many security products are still asking, I think, the wrong questions. They are trying to figure out if an email is good or bad. And we use binary decision-making to establish if somebody is trusted or not trusted. And as a result, if we can trust the email, and not surprisingly, this keeps failing. And it fails to the spectacular tune of 94% of threats that start in the inbox. This is one of the most porous sides of your business. It's where information is freely flowing in and out. It is now, email really is the fabric with which we are keeping our teams connected. We are brainstorming and so on. And 94 attacks starting in the inbox is quite striking. That's 9 out of 10 of all of the hacks that we read about in the newspaper or that you've experienced yourself or heard from your friends. They've started with an email. And so when we think, as we're shifting to remote working, or we're thinking, how on earth can I trust that the sender is who they're thinking, who they're saying? How do we think through every single email that might be slightly unusual? And how do I decide whether or not this is unusual bad or unusual good? Well, we need to be switching that same philosophy over to our security mentality, to how we're thinking about cybersecurity and how we're thinking about tools that can help safeguard those workers. And the best way is not to think of it in terms of good and bad, but is to change the question to think, does this email belong? Does this email belong given what I know about the business? Does this make sense given what I, the AI, know about these users? I want to share with you a quick other side of the spectrum story, because frequently then I get asked, well, Mariana, okay, great, but what about something that is brand new? How does the AI know that this actually belongs because it's a brand new activity? Well, for that, I want to share with you a story from one of our customers that was looking for new gifts to share with participants of an event. And the marketing, I think it was the marketing executive who started looking at patch.com. This is a website that sells plants online. It's done extraordinarily well recently, as many people have brought the indoors into their houses. This user went to patch.com, signed up to their newsletter, and then received an email from, having signed up to their newsletter. They were very quick in receiving their welcome to Patch newsletter. We can see it here on the left-hand side. What was curious and what I think is really interesting is how the AI interpreted this activity. It was completely unusual for somebody at this company to be receiving an email from hello@epatchplants.com. The AI, we can see it here on the right-hand side, scored this as 99% rare. Sure, it's in the green box. To say, in other words, that this is extraordinarily rare. Nobody at our company has ever received mail from the sender, and it is very unusual. But it's 99% rare, not 100% rare. Why? Because the AI had also understood the context of the activity of the human behind this account holder and had seen the activity go into this domain beforehand. So just that 1% score makes the difference also between the AI saying, this is very unusual, but I don't need to stop it because it's not threatening. This is how we think about those subtle adaptations that AI can bring, how to respond in a very surgical manner, in a very precise manner to all of the different scenarios that will span between a trusted sender that is now behaving in an unusual way and threatening behavior versus a brand new contact who's actually not representing a threat at all. What's the evolution of this? Let's wrap up with some future gazing. Let's think about AI as a category of science. I'm always fascinated by the new things that we're teaching computers to do, especially when it comes to emulating human experiences. And I think that the best example of this we can actually find in art. In 2018, an AI painted this painting. We're going to let the art historians and art critics decide whether or not this is a good painting. Personally, I think it's wonderful. It's very serene. It has the essence of the same great masters. It's, I think, would belong perfectly well hanging at the National Gallery or any other art museum. The point is also that this was sold at auction for a very high sum, together with also other paintings done by AI. The portrait of Edmund Bellamy sold for over $430,000. There is a market for this, and there's also a market for the AI that is capable to develop and create new things. And it does this by a series of adversarial networks. So we take two AIs and we pit them against each other. Whatever AI gets better at fooling the other, it gets stronger. And when we let these two AIs go to battle in the context of art, we get this beautiful art creation. But it's not very far away to be thinking of AI-powered attacks, and that gives rise to these digital fakes. These are attacks that are emails or pieces of communications that are virtually indistinguishable from the real one. We have seen AI be able to adapt human word with the summer, with the GPT-3, fantastic piece of research that emulates human expression in poetry, in essay writing. In the hands of an attacker, what will this look like? Well, it means that the reconnaissance, the whole piece of studying, how do I sound like someone when we get those credentials and we're going into people's clouds or email environments and we're having to manually think, how will I impersonate this person? Will be greatly reduced by having the AI do that for you. Supercharge those attacks, move them at machine speeds, and do this at speed and at scale. How do we fight back when the criminals are arming up with AI? I would say that the only real way forward is to fight back with AI that is also adaptive, that will work at speed and scale, and will fight back in real time, because even though not all anomalies represent a threat, every threat starts with an anomalous activity. With that, I wanted to thank you so much, Matt. I believe we have some time for questions.
Yes, indeed, we do. Thanks so much for that, Mariana. Thoroughly interesting. Particularly love the artwork there that I've not seen myself before. Let me just duck over here, have a quick look for some questions. Okay, well, this picks up on what you've just touched on there, actually. Will we see criminals increasingly using more AI as we go forward?
So this is personal, sort of my personal philosophy, but definitely yes. I think we've already seen advantages of criminals using automation tools, and where then lies the difference between automation and AI, again, is something that is hotly debated. But what we have seen is domains being registered, purchased and registered en mass email campaigns that are sent out. It's not so far to then think, what's the next evolution? Well, if you're coming from marketing, for example, you know that we can already use AI to enhance subject lines or enhance the copy of the email when we're sending, for example, e-commerce offers to make them more likely to be clicked on. That is the same principles then that the criminal will use in sending out their campaigns. They will look to augment or improve the likelihood of click conversion. Ultimately, that too is an application of AI. The more future ones of then crafting the entire prose, it's impossible to tell whether or not we've even seen it already, because it is that good at mimicking human experience. But ultimately, does it really matter if the email is still getting there? We just want to stop it. Whether it was generated by an AI or by a human, it's still a threat.
Okay, that's interesting. And is it software development kits that people are buying, or where are people accessing the AI that they're then using to target the enterprise environment?
Unfortunately, a lot of this is freely available. There are adaptations tools that are already open source. Of course, then there are kits and services that are available for hire in the deepest, darkest corners of the dark web. Actually, you don't even have to go that far. We've seen a lot of reports of ransomware as a service now be offered as well as kits, or as I go back to open source. And lots of journalists who have written stories also how they've spent a couple $100 to develop deep fakes and stuff like that.
Okay, super, great. All right, and with that, we will wrap up. Thanks so much for your time, Mariana. Thanks so much for presenting for us. Brilliant presentation. Really enjoyed that. I'm sure our audience took a lot from what you've had to say there, because clearly you're at the cutting edge of security at the moment. That's the end of this session, guys. It's now time for a short break. Please take this time to network, especially with our expert vendors, and of course with yourselves. You can just duck over into the vendor tab on the main navigation and duck into what is essentially a virtual trade show booth. As I said at the welcome this morning, don't be afraid. Go and have a chat online with some of the guys over there. And with that, we'll be back for our next presentation, I believe, at 10:45. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye for now.